Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with Baritone jazz saxophonist Gary Smulyan. We caught up with him in New York on May 20, 2020, during the COVID-19 quarantine to discuss how he contracted the virus, his recovery, his outlook, and the hope for the future. Enjoy.
Hey, before we begin here, I just want to let you know, and I've never forgotten this, since I began my show in 2011, you were one of the very first musicians, big-time musicians, that took a risk, had no idea who I was, and you were very gracious, and you really did so much. I just completed my 1,000th interview, and there's no way any of this would have happened without help from some very important people, and I'm very indebted to both you and Hubert Laws in the beginning for saying, all right, I'm going to give this kid a shot. So I appreciate it.
Wow, that's beautiful, man. That's what, it's what life's about, right?
Yeah, really it is.
It's what life's about, especially now in these times. It's like now we need to help each other out as much as we can. It's just it's getting deep out here. This is a crazy time.
Man, yeah, well said. And what I want to know first and foremost as we get into this, when did you start noticing, I don't know if it was early or mid-March, that this enormous domino was falling and live jazz was going to just be silenced?
Well, I have an interesting story about that. March 6th and 7th, I played at Smalls with Frank Basile. We played music of Johnny Griffin and Lockjaw Davis on two baritones called a band we're hoping to get off the ground called Boss Baritones. So we played March 6th and 7th, which was Friday and Saturday. March 8th, Ralph LaLama and we flew to Paris. We were starting a tour of Europe. And I was monitoring the situation through the CDC. This is at the very beginning of this whole thing. And at that point, the only country that was really at level 4 was Italy. And so we were going to France and Austria and Germany and Switzerland. At that point, they were basically saying it's a level 1 warning. Just, practice social distancing, there's community spread, but, we're not upping the game for those countries at this point. And none of our gigs were canceled. So, we were both a little skittish and feeling like, well, I don't know, but, we had a tour, we had 2 weeks of gigs, and we figured, well, if nothing's canceled so far, maybe, we always felt like we wanted to show up and play. That's the kind of sensibility that, I always had about playing, was you try and make the gig if you can, So we got on the plane. We flew to Paris on March 8th, and the plane was about half full. It wasn't packed, but it wasn't totally empty. People were moving around, and we got to Paris. We played at the Duc de Lombard on the 9th, which was a Monday. And, there weren't very many people there. And then the next day, we drove to Passau, Germany. We had the night off and we spent 9 hours in the car. And on Wednesday, we played at this very lovely little theater in a modern art museum in Passau, Germany. Once again, not very well attended, but there wasn't really a feeling of what was going to come later on. We didn't really have any clue at that point, but it was in the air. So that night, 2 in the morning, it was technically Thursday morning, the 12th, we get frantic calls from our wives, and Ralph's watching CNN. Trump was closing the borders, no more flights from Europe that Friday. So this was technically Thursday. So we had to get home because he was not allowing any flights. As of midnight Friday, the borders between the United States and Europe were going to be closed, no more flights. So we had to really scramble to get home, March 12th. So we were on the phone and, trying to get in touch with the person who booked our flights to try and change our tickets, but it was impossible, because of the time difference. So we had no choice. So we purchased flights on, it was a Lufthansa flight, but it was United Airlines, we were able to get 2 seats flying home from Munich, 3:30 in the afternoon on Thursday, and get home. And so we got home around 6 o'clock Thursday. We did make it. And that night I spiked a fever. That night I got sick as soon as I got home that evening, which turned out to be COVID. So it was a good thing I got home, and Ralph Lalama got sick 3 days after me. So we both had the same kind of trajectory. We both got sick from the virus. My suspicion is we got it on the plane going to Paris on that Sunday. That's what I think, because of the incubation period. And then as soon as we got home, then that week, middle of March, things started shutting down. Clubs were closing. Everything was canceled. All my gigs for the rest of the year were canceled. And so in retrospect, which, or hindsight, which is 2020, as they say, we shouldn't have gone. But at the time, we had a tour. Nothing was canceled. It was a little dicey, but we decided to go. I guess it was a mistake if you look back, but, musicians try and show up and play. So we were both sick for about 3.5 weeks, and just kind of, but nothing was ever alarming in terms of, I never lost my ability to breathe. I could breathe fine. Never had any lung problems, breathing issues. It was basically just a week of fever, and then just a feeling of this wavy feeling of like a couple good days, a bad day, a couple bad days, a good day, a couple good hours, a couple bad hours. This thing just lingered a long time. And and I was self-quarantined in my room, one room in our apartment for 17 days. I didn't come out for 17 days. Because I was here with my wife and daughter, and they didn't get it, so that was a good thing. But anyway, that's a long story short. We're making a long story even longer. We both went to Europe and both caught the virus. So as soon as we got home, then everything started getting canceled. So that's life. Unfortunately, a lot of other people got affected a lot worse with this virus. We certainly were not asymptomatic, and we certainly didn't have a mild case, but it wasn't a case where we required any hospitalization or any kind of, ventilator or anything like that. We were able to recover at home, and we're both fully recovered at this point. It's been 2 months, 8 weeks or so. So that's what happened. It's pretty far out.
In a lot of interviews, a whole lot that I have talked to that has actually contracted COVID-19. So, do you know if you develop antibodies to it? Have they said anything about that?
I have no idea, and I'm going on the assumption that that's the one thing I'm interested in at this point. Not the one thing, but in terms of myself. So basically, the research now is saying that they don't know. So I assume that I don't have immunity. So I'm really trying hard not to get too close, and I'm not leaving my apartment. Because a lot of people in my building and where I live in Yonkers, there are still people not wearing masks. And I really don't want to be around that, not because I'm afraid of getting it, but it just really gets me mad. It just puts me in a very agitated state to see people walking around without masks on in my building. So until we figure, the science has some kind of definitive answer in terms of immunity, the only assumption I can really go on at this point is that I can get it again. But even though, I kind of think that after 8 weeks there is some kind of antibodies built up, the testing so far is so flawed, and there are false negatives and false positives, and I'm not really sure that I would even want to go to a place to get tested and be around other people because of the reinfection possibility. So until they have this whole thing really ironed out and figured out and 100% sure that the antibody testing works, I'm going on the assumption that I don't have immunity.
So, going through something like this, it's a global pandemic, and it's something that you caught, and, it made you sick, and just even all of us that have been in fear of this thing that's really gripped us, and we've had to revert all the social customs we've known for our whole lives. Let me ask you, what kind of memories and people and things are you drawing strength off of? I mean, especially during the time when you were sick, and even this whole 60-ish days that we've been out of commission, and even for however long we're going to still be out, especially as live musicians. What are you drawing strength off of?
Well, a lot of it was from my students, from teaching. I was really so happy to check in with them every week. I teach at Purchase College and at Rutgers University. And just, now that has ended, that's, I'm going to try and stay in touch with all my students through the course of the summer and see how they're doing. My dad is 4 miles down the street. He's 89 years old. He's in a senior building, a building for senior citizens. He's not in assisted living. He's independent, but he's been quarantined in his room for 8 weeks as well. So I have to make sure he's okay. So I call him a couple times a day just to check in. It's really the thing that's really been the tricky thing is really coming to a reassessment of what's going to happen to all of us as a musical community as a result of this virus in terms of our ability to work. For me, this is that's the thing I've been really thinking a lot about. It's just all my friends and colleagues and that all the people that we're in this with, even people who own small restaurants, and it's really wreaked havoc with a lot of people's ability to make a living in the future, and how we're going to reinvent ourselves and to try and come to some kind of grips. I think it's even too soon to even try and figure that out because we're still early in the game here, I think, and the science is changing. Every day we learn something new. But I think it's really important for us as a musical community to really help each other out and figure out as musicians as a whole, how are we going to help and support each other get through this and really be there for each other, because we all need each other really more than ever, because this has affected us in a really deep and profound way, and in a way that might be permanent. I don't know.
Well, once we do come back to live music, I want to know this. What realizations do you hope both musician and audience member gets from this time away?
Well, I just hope that people feel secure to show up. I don't know if that's ever going to happen again, to be honest with you. To whether or not 140 people are going to feel confident to go down the stairs and get packed into the Village Vanguard, or Smalls, or Mesro, or Smoke, or the clubs in New York. I'm a little bit fearful that it might not come back. I don't know. That's the thing that's of a real major concern to me, especially as somebody who has recovered from this virus. And I don't really feel like I can confidently go to those clubs. I don't feel comfortable getting on a plane. I don't feel comfortable being around crowds of people, even with the vaccine. I don't know. I'm not really sure. This thing spooked me, and I'm not really sure. I mean, I hope we can come back the way we were before, but to be honest with you, I don't know. I wish I had a better answer, but I'm not feeling particularly optimistic about it, at least from my point of view, in terms of how I'm going to feel about exposing myself in that situation, especially since I had this thing. And, unless they really come up with a way that, they beat this thing.
Yeah, the one thing I've been thinking about a lot during this time is, jazz of all the arts is like the highest form of improv. I mean, no matter how much you do it, you can never Bill Murray Groundhog Day what you do on stage. And I think the way this world is happening right now, with this being such a new thing, and this is the highest level of improv. It's almost as though, from an artistic standpoint, jazz musicians are more tailor-made for this moment in history.
Interesting. That's an interesting viewpoint. Yeah. I don't know. I think we're going to be also forced to look at different ways to present our music through technology, through the internet, through computers, through, I think this is going to have a profound effect on live music in general, not just jazz, but everything. So I don't know. I think we're in a long, stretched out reassessment period. And I think we really have to pay attention to what the scientists are, and the data and all that is saying. I think that's the only thing that we can really go on, and unfortunately, I think we haven't done a great job, at least our government hasn't done a great job of protecting people and making sure that they're going to be cool through this. It's a little bit scary, and it remains scary every day if you read the newspaper.
Yeah, it certainly does. It certainly does. Well, Gary, hey, thanks again, man, for sharing your story. And I just, it's a captivating one. It is actually the very first one that I've captured from a musician that's actually gotten COVID and gotten over it. So thanks again. And again, really, I don't know how to thank you for giving me that shot. My son's 15. He's been listening to a lot of these interviews, and it's been a big part of his life. And I was just, he talks about these seminal moments that I've had in interviews, and I've talked about Sonny Rollins and some of these other interviews, and I always bring you up. I bring Hubert Laws up because you guys gave me that shot. I appreciate you doing that.
Oh, it's my pleasure, really. I'm really happy to share my story.
Well, hey, good luck. Hopefully we can catch up when things, get to a better place in our very surreal history of humanity, and stay safe. And,
okay. Thanks for calling and reaching out. You stay healthy, okay?
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And Gary's a great friend of the show. He gave us our first shot at interviews. We always thank him for his time, his cool, and his music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.